Salvete omnes. Let's take a look at Catullus 58. We'll be reading this poem in the hendecasyllabic meter, and we'll also be translating it into English. Let's start with that first line. Caeli lesbia nostra lesbi illa lesbia quam Catullus unam, plus quam satque suosa mavit omnes. So we'll pause there and start translating. Let's take a look at this first word. This is a name, and take a minute to think about what case you think it's in. We have a note saying this is probably M. Caelius Rufus, Catullus' successor for a time in the affections of Lesbia or Clodia. So if the name is Caelius, what form is Caeli? I'll give you a minute to think about it. All right, so the case of Caeli is vocative. And usually when we see names like Caelius, so the end of his name is IUS, you might be more used to vocative second declension masculines ending in E, the letter E or E, but it's a sub-rule of Latin that the IUS endings from the second declension find their vocative form in the letter I or E. So that's why we have Caeli in the vocative. And you might have confused this for a genitive, but if we saw his name in the genitive, it would be Caelii with that extra I. So the fact that we go from IUS just to the single I tells us that his name is in the vocative. You probably also could have deduced that from the context if you liked, but a little review of the vocative. Okay, so Caelius, our Lesbia, that Lesbia. So our Lesbia, that Lesbia. And I invite you to consider what exactly Catullus is invoking with nostra. Is it just the royal we, or is he involving Caelius and sharing Lesbia, our Lesbia? That Lesbia, again, so we have a nice repetition here. We've got Lesbia's name 3 times, as Garrison notes. He writes, Lesbia, Lesbia, Lesbia. Catullan repetitions effectively arrayed to communicate obsessive grief. Nostra may be the poetic we, but if this is the Caelius who also had a bad time with Lesbia Clodia, she is also our Lesbia. And some scholars disagree with this and say that it's just the poetic we. Okay, so we're noticing not only the repetition perhaps, but what else do you notice about the word order and the 3 ways that Catullus invokes Lesbia's name? But back to our translation. Whom, and this quam, is a relative pronoun. Take a minute to think of what gender, case, and number it is and what its antecedent is. Its gender is feminine, its case is accusative, and its number is singular. Its antecedent is Lesbia. So a little review that relative pronouns get their gender and their number from what? From their antecedent. So Lesbia is feminine singular, so is quam. And then the relative pronoun gets its other feature, its case, from its role within the relative clause. So in the relative clause, our subject is Catullus in the nominative, and quam is therefore going to be the direct object of amavit. So whom Catullus loved alone more than himself and his own, all of his own people. So we have two different iterations of quam here. One as a relative pronoun and one as setting up a comparison. And we can tell that that's what's going on with the second quam because we've got the plus, because we have a comparative setting up the idea of more already. That's how we know that this quam is going to be setting up that comparison with plus, more than. Now into the last 2 lines. I'll read them aloud in Latin. And as you watch this video, try to read along with me, or if that's too awkward, try to pause the video after I've read and then read it out loud yourself. Nunc in quadriviis et angiportis glubet magnanimi remine potes. Let's translate these lines now. Okay, so now in crossroads and alleyways, she is the subject of glubet, which is implied because the verb is singular and because we started with the concept of Lesbia being the subject. So now we see what she's up to. We had this whole setup here where we introduced her name 3 times, and then we talked about how much Catullus loved her. And now we learn what it is that she did after we learn where she is in line 4. So we learn what she did. She glubit. And this is a complicated word. Garrison has a note on it. He says, blunt, profane, and devastating in its context, contrasted as it is with the high-sounding magnanimi remi nepotes. The crude sound of the word contributes to its impact, as we are left to imagine how exactly Lesbia peels the descendants of Rome's founder. So this Garrison note doesn't actually tell you what the word means. I mean, it does mean peel, but in the sense of peeling back foreskin on a penis. So with that extra meaning in mind, now she peels back the foreskin, and the direct object of glubit is actually nepotes. We don't have the word foreskin in here. So she peels the grandsons of magnanimous Remus in alleyways, at crossroads and alleyways. So now that's what she's up to. This is contrasted with what used to be in Amawit. So she used to be whom Catullus loved more than himself and more than his own eyes. And I invite you to consider the difference between then and now in this poem. Nunc sets up something new. Now she's doing all this glubit. And how does that affect how Catullus loves her? He doesn't say exactly what he thinks of her now. He does use Amawit in the past. So I invite you to ponder whether Catullus still loves Lesbia as he did before in this poem, or if there's something else shifting. How would you describe the emotional shift in lines 4 through 5? So thanks for tuning in. Valete omnes.